and courage. We persist because we are fighting for gut issues, living wages, land for the tillers, because education, accessible health care, decent housing, mass transportation, because protection and freedom from gender-based violence, and genuine peace that addresses the historical grievances of the poor and marginalized. We fight for survival and for a better future of the poor, women, along with the poor, working, and marginalized peoples, create the wealth of the world. The world is ours, the 99%. We fight tooth and nail for it. Women who have offered their lives, such as Honduran indigenous leader and environmental rights defender, Berta Cáceres, teach us that the struggle for liberation from exploitation and oppression is a fight to the end. We wrestle to win. We are honored to have women leaders and activists join us today to share their experience. We are honored our event will share an analysis of the systemic oppression of women in the global south and lessons from women's struggles. We hope that this would serve as tools as we stand for our rights and social transformation. We hope that finally, we join the call for a free environment for women and other marginalized groups around the world, fighting for social justice. Thank you very much. And other marginalized groups around the world.
Thank you so much, Jennifer.
They suffer from poverty and are excluded from decision-making and governance by corporations and elite-led states. Landlessness remains the major problem of peasant women in the global south. Land monopoly by corporations and the local elite drive resource extraction and displace peasant, rural, and indigenous women from their communities. Women workers are exploited through low wages, under informal and vulnerable conditions. Neoliberal policies have eroded labor regulations and entrenched miserable working conditions. Women's underpaid and unpaid care work fill in the gaps in social services. Traditional gender roles force women to spend more than 3 times more hours on unpaid care work than men. The pandemic has pushed 435 million more women and girls to live in extreme poverty or on $1.90 a day. Yet to recover from the pandemic, women struggle with the global oil and food price hikes due to the war in Ukraine. Global powers use wars and occupation to pursue their economic and geopolitical interests. Global military spending rose to over $2 trillion in 2021. The US continued to top military spending with an expenditure of $801 billion. War and military occupation destroy societal foundations for the exercise of basic human rights. Rape and violence against women worsen in context of war and militarization. Corporations and the elite employ the military and police to facilitate land and resource grabs and repress women's assertions for rights. Women activists and their organizations experience harassment, surveillance, arrests, and detention on false charges and gender-based violence. Counterinsurgency and counterterrorism laws have escalated attacks against women activists. Despite challenges, women continue to resist corporate and elite power and fight for people's rights and sovereignty. IBON International proposes people-powered democracy as a framework for social transformation that upholds people's rights and sovereignty. Building people-powered democracy entails democratizing the ownership and control over productive resources and asserting the full participation of people and their organizations in development processes and governance. These would address barriers to women's access to economic resources and their exclusion from development and governance. Building people-powered democracy with women and their organizations at the forefront of decision-making would create conditions for the advancement of women's rights.
The short video has shown us the major problems faced by working and marginalized women in the global south, from landlessness to exploitation under neoliberal regimes to gender-based violence. Now, we will proceed to our moderated discussion to ground our analysis. We have here with us women leaders and women activists. For our first question, what are the key economic and political issues faced by women in your respective countries and sectors? Perhaps we can proceed with Chatu Siwandi.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me clearly? I think you can hear me. So thank you very much for inviting me to talk on this webinar. And also it's kind of like a important issue and also important discussion to initiate and to share our actions about once it's come to the resistance. So I will explain a bit about the situations, women's situation, particularly in Sri Lanka in the middle of this economic and also the political crisis. So as you all know, like Sri Lanka is facing its hardest time in the histories with the economic crisis. If I just mention some data about the economic situation here in Sri Lanka, the prices of the bread is about around 400 rupees, and also 1 kilo of rice is also about 200 rupees. The annual inflation rate of this year by July 2020 is 60%. Okay, and also the highest inflation rate has been recorded in the food commodities, and it is recorded as 90%. So further, we are facing huge debt crisis as well. And today, like nowadays, IMF has visited here, and we are in the middle of the conversation about debt restructuring. So with all of these, the crisis situation here happening in Sri Lanka, we experience long hours of power cut, and also we have a lot of long queues for the fuel, and also it's skyrocketing food prices, lack of medicines are some of the everyday life that myself and also others face. So with this situation, women are the mostly vulnerable people because it's primary responsible of women to ensure the food security at the household. But this economic situation had adversely impact on women, especially particularly once we concern about the women in plantation sector, rural women and fishery women, and also women farmers. So these are like a kind of like a particular people and particular sections where women women have adversely experienced this impact of this economic crisis. So if we focus on the plantation sector, the minimum, it's basically tea and rubber plantations. So in the tea plantation, women engage in daily wage earners to pick the tea, right? So their minimum wage is around 750 to 1,000 rupees. But it also depends on the climate and also some other factors. And they don't have their own space for cultivate or engage into any other any other activities or cultivation, because they don't have land title and they are living in these lying houses. And in the meantime, they don't have other time to engage in another jobs, because their day is very structured. The other thing is like the women who are working in the pre-trade zone, because of this economic crisis, their minimum their salary level has not been increased by the government, and there is no any provision also taken by the government. These pre-trade zone workers, particularly women, their products are exported to the Europe and also America and also those region, and they contribute to earn and gain foreign exchange. But they get minimum salaries, and they have used to do a lot of works. It means like they send these salaries to their families, and they also depend on these earnings. So it has also been impacted. The other thing is the fisher folk. Like in Sri Lanka, with this crisis, we didn't have enough dollars for buying fuel. So therefore, the fuel distribution system in locally has totally collapsed, and there are a lot of fuel queues in Sri Lanka. So especially for the fisher folks, they need kerosene to go to the deep sea and do the fishing. But as I had discussion with fisher groups in Mana, kind of like 3 weeks back, what they shared is they haven't been to sea for 2 months. So then there are a lot of activities which are affiliated with the after they come to the after they catch the fish, because a lot of post harvesting activities of the fisher industry is linked with the fisher women, right? So they are the one who distribute and who select and who engage in dry fishing, and also they are the one who handle the market as well. So this system has also been collapsed, and therefore these fisher women's lives are in kind of like ad hoc situation. And the other thing is, like in Sri Lanka recently, there was a ban of agrochemicals, right? But it was not kind of a sustainable ban, and it was like implemented without a proper plan. Because of this, government had to revoke this ban. But before that, like fertilizer, especially the urea was distributed to the farmers as a subsidy. Now the price of this urea has increased as 40,000 rupees. So farmers are not able to, and they can't afford this much of money because they had not been educated, or they had not been like they don't have enough access to the alternative knowledge like agroecology. Therefore, this transition from conventional farming to the agroecology or chemical-free farming is quite a challenge for the farmers who used to do conventional farming for a long period of time. But government didn't have supportive system for them. Therefore, the harvest was there was a deduction of the harvest, and also the women farmers' role in this situation is also impacted. Therefore, this whole situation, economic and also the political situation, has impacted on the women's lives centrally. And as a result of that, women are getting into more troubles, like how to handle with their day-to-day expenses and also expenses of their children. In the other hand, they had to go for like a debt and also kind of like loans. But in the same time, because of the Sri Lankan law, which affiliated with the lands and also other resources, they discriminate the women. Therefore, they can't get into the formal loan structures, and they go to the informal microfinance debt facilities. So these kind of situations adverse women's conditions within this political and also the economic situation. I will share more in the next stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chatu, for sharing with us about the inflation and debt crisis in Sri Lanka that have made it difficult for women and the people to access their basic needs and services, as well as the dire situation of peasant women, including farmers and fisher folk. Now we will have Sayang, Sayang Mandabayan from Front National Mahasiswa Pemuda Papua, Again, everyone, you can proceed to the English interpretation channel to be able to hear the English translation. Sayang, you have the floor.
Kita di Papua Barat ada satu tokoh perempuan, Yosepa Alongma. Waktu beliau adalah tokoh perempuan yang bangkit, perempuan yang membela tanah adat, menentang PT Freeport yang mengelola biji besi dan emas di Timika, Papua Barat. Nama Yosepa adalah seorang tokoh perempuan yang luar biasa, yang menjadi inspirasi banyak perempuan Papua untuk bangkit dan berjuang mempertahankan tanah adat hari ini. Yosepa Alongma melawan PT Freeport dengan sangat tangguh. Ada banyak aksi yang dilakukan oleh seorang Yosepa Alongma. Misalnya menduduki bandara udara selama 3 hari pada tahun 1991, sehingga Yosepa Alongma ditangkap. Bukan hanya itu, Yosepa Alongma juga melakukan pengorganisiran dan kemudian rakyat melawan, memotong pipa-pipa yang membawa biji emas dari PT Freeport. Dan itu membuat Yosepa Alongma ditangkap dan ditahan pada tahun 1994. Itu menginspirasi banyak perempuan Papua untuk bangkit melawan. Sebelumnya tanah adat Papua yang diduduki oleh pemerintah Indonesia hari ini telah diduduki secara ilegal. Banyak perjanjian, bahkan penentuan pendapat rakyat PPRA itu cacat hukum karena tidak melibatkan seluruh orang Papua, satu orang satu suara pada tahun 1969. Tapi kebangkitan perlawanan setelah pendudukan Indonesia itu membuat rakyat bangkit melawan. Yosepa Alongma salah satu tokoh perempuan Papua yang bangkit memperjuangkan melalui tanah adat. Sebelumnya ada banyak perempuan Papua yang sudah terlibat secara perlawanan secara politik. Tapi Yosepa bangkit melalui perlawanan tanah adat. Setelah itu banyak lagi Yosepa Alongma muda yang bangkit untuk melawan mempertahankan tanah adat. Perempuan Papua di masa Orde Baru, pemerintahan Presiden Soeharto, itu lebih banyak mengambil peran di rumah. Jadi mereka karena setiap gerakan itu terpantau. Kalau mereka mau ke kebun, mereka mau ke laut, mau menggarap tanah adat, wilayah adat mereka itu di justice, mereka itu dihakimi sebagai memihak kepada OPM, Organisasi Papua Merdeka, gerakan rakyat yang menentang pendudukan Indonesia. Tapi dengan proses penjajahan yang semakin masif dilakukan oleh Indonesia, perempuan Papua mengambil posisi untuk ada di depan. Kalau sebelumnya mereka melihat, mengalami kekerasan karena laki-laki, suami, saudara laki-laki, anak, itu dikatakan terlibat bersama OPM. Lalu perempuan itu mengalami kekerasan, diam saja, dilecehkan. Tapi setelah ada kebangkitan, perempuan mulai bangkit melawan dan hari ini banyak. Saya misalnya ditangkap pada 2019 karena anti rasisme. Jadi ketika tanah adat sudah diambil, sudah dirampas, perempuan bangkit melawan, ada kriminalisasi di sana. Proses itu terjadi secara sistematis di Papua Barat hari ini, di tanah kami. Dan perempuan sudah tidak berdiri lagi di belakang, tapi perempuan sudah berdiri di garis depan. Hampir setiap tahun ada penangkapan kepada aktivis perempuan di tanah Papua, baik yang menyerukan membela tanah adat mereka. Mereka tidak memilih diam lagi. Sudah banyak di daerah-daerah perempuan yang bangkit melawan. Misalnya kemarin, tanggal 7 September 2022, Rosita Tecuari bersama dengan perempuan yang lain mendesak pemerintah Jayapura untuk mencabut izin kelapa sawit di suku Namblong di Jayapura. Ini bentuk dari perlawanan perempuan selama pendudukan Indonesia di atas tanah Papua. Perempuan Papua sudah tidak memilih lagi untuk diam, tunduk, tapi bangkit melawan untuk merebut kembali kedaulatan atas tanah adat perempuan Papua di Papua Barat. Kami menyerukan kepada seluruh perempuan, solidaritas perempuan di mana saja berada untuk berdiri bersama kami perempuan Papua di Papua Barat. Hari ini negara secara sepihak telah menetapkan otonomi khusus dan menetapkan daerah otonomi baru atau pemekaran wilayah sebanyak 4 provinsi. Jadi tanpa melalui prosedur hukum yang benar, secara sepihak pusat langsung menetapkan daerah pemekaran dengan jumlah penduduk yang tidak memadai, tidak sesuai dengan aturan hukum yang berlaku di Indonesia. Dan ini sangat merugikan rakyat Papua. Tanah-tanah adat akan dirampas. Sama seperti seluruh wilayah di belahan bumi. Ketika ada perusahaan di situ, ketika ada pemerintah di situ, pasti ada militer, polisi, dan tentara di situ yang selalu berpihak kepada pemilik modal kapitalis. Sementara rakyat sendiri ditindas. Perampasan tanah adat akan terus jalan. Pembangunan adalah wajah baru dari kolonialisme yang terjadi di tanah Papua melalui daerah pemekaran. Kami ingin dunia tahu bahwa kami perempuan Papua bisa hidup tanpa uang, tanpa sawit, tanpa pertambangan, tapi kami tidak bisa hidup tanpa tanah adat kami. Kami mengulurkan tangan kami, perempuan Papua dari Papua Barat. Mari bersama-sama dengan kami memperjuangkan tanah adat kami. Merebut kembali kedaulatan tanah adat kami. Terima kasih. Untuk satu, solusinya hanya Papua Merdeka.
Thank you so much, Sayang, for sharing about the indigenous women's struggle for land and liberation in West Papua against the Indonesian occupation. We now have Andy from APWLD.
Hello, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can hear you clearly,
Okay.
Andy.
Okay, yes. Okay, hello, good afternoon, sisters and comrades. Yeah, thank you for the IBON International for the invitation. I feel very honored for this conversation to share our inputs and also analysis. And yes, I'm based in Indonesia. So when I heard Sayang to tell story about the Indonesia occupation and how this make West Papua very sovereign. So yes, it's just like interlink what we also find in APWLD. So we APWLD is a regional feminist network with over 250 members in 30 countries across Asia and Pacific. In our analysis, neoliberal globalization continues to perpetuate historical injustice of colonializations, and then it ossifies the global South's neo-colonial ties to the global North by relegating the former to the lower end of global production. So yeah, so you see that this development in Asia is the case. The integration into global economy is characterized by its heavy dependence on foreign capital and markets. So we already seen it from the video, the highlight of the report, right? So except for East Asian economies, national industries in many Asian countries remain underdeveloped. The whole of Asia has become a global factory and a continent of labor for multinational corporations and transnational corporations based in the industrialized global north. Former Asian colonies remain at the periphery of the world economy as a sources of raw materials and cheap labor, including women's work. Under the neoliberal regime, the global economy has experienced a significant economic crisis and slow recovery with the severest impact on the working class people. And meanwhile, the world's wealth has become more and concentrated in the hands of a few individuals and corporations. So from 2010 until 2019, the decade following the global financial crisis of 2008 and until 2009, the world economy grew only by average 3% annually, year by year. In 2019, only 26 wealthiest people in the world own the same amount of wealth as the world poorest half, and then most of whom were women. And then the combined revenues of the 10 wealthiest corporations in 2015 surpasses the 180 poorest countries' combined revenues. So in Asia and the Pacific, the region's billionaires' wealth was more than 7 times the combined wealth of the region's poorest countries. So particularly for workers, the deepening inequality and promotion of neoliberal policies translate to dwindling real wages, rising living costs, reduced social protection and social security. Consequently, a large portion of women workers cannot afford a decent life despite having a job. So what we found also, 1 in 5 workers is among working people, either they're moderately or extremely poor, with the daily income or daily wage of $3.2 or even below. So as I mentioned by Jennifer in her keynote speech, so we can hear that decent work deficits, poverty, wages, labor rights violations are the reality of women today. So women's labor in Asia has become synonymous to flexible and precarious work. And then wages of women workers lag behind the living wage, while the big companies amass profits and low wages prevent workers from affording decent homes for themselves, let alone their families. And I also read from the IBON International white paper, right? So you describe the situation of women workers in special economic zones. So IPDBLD and our partners are currently conducting the feminist participatory action research on women labor rights in special economic zones in Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Philippines, Cambodia, Indonesia. So what we found that special economic zones were set up, of course, to connect global supply chains and to facilitate capital mobility, and have been flourishing, extracting profits from the women workers in Asia Pacific. So governments provide investors in special economic zones with minimal or even zero taxes. So they introduced the idea of tax holiday, tax incentives, while at the same time they are guaranteeing the well, yeah, I think I can hear somebody speak.
Please continue.
Okay, yeah, it's okay. So in the form of tax holidays and also tax incentives, while at the same time they're guaranteeing the absence of unionization, absence of rights to organize in this industrial and post-industrial zones. So either by law. So like what we found in all those countries that we have conducted the research, so they are affirmed by the law, adjusted by the law, and then also by practice. So meanwhile, a heavy tax burden through consumer good taxes or by so-called transfer pricing is imposed on great majority of the population to compensate for the revenue loss due to corporate incentives. So based on what we found in FPAR, all of them in the factories, suppliers in the special economic zones, linked to the Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 of the international brand suppliers. So you have questions. What is tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3? So tier 1 suppliers is they are direct suppliers of final products or final garments or final goods, yeah. And then tier 2 suppliers, they are suppliers of subcontractors of for tier 1 suppliers. And tier 3, they are subcontractors for the tier 2. So women in the contractualization with precarity, income, and job security are the reality of most women workers, either in tier 1, either tier 2, and tier 3 in special economic zones. So you see, that the reality is a reality that I also want to link the stories that have been shared by Chatu, right? Like where the Sri Lanka government now lobbying the IMF and also World Bank for a bailout. And then also it could be creating another blow for the struggling economy. So the situation in Sri Lanka shed light of the broken system of a neoliberal global economic governance, and then exposed the role of World Bank and IMF in this economic crisis. Okay, so why highlighting the special economic zones is very important. So World Bank supported the development of free trade zones in Sri Lanka, aiming to attract foreign direct investment and foreign companies involving the global brands that I already mentioned, international brands, and their apparel suppliers, while the corporation enjoy the incentive schemes. And 85% of workers in FTZs or special economic zones in Sri Lanka are women. And then also most of women migrated from rural areas and then economically marginalized. And correct me if I'm wrong, Chatu, in Katunayaka free trade zones, thousands of government workers have to cope with long worker hours for little pay and are forced to work in exploitative system. And then they're very difficult. It's very difficult for them to get unpaid sick leave, especially during COVID-19, crisis are happening on peak. And at the same time, neoliberal policies promoted informalizations of the workforce. A staggering 61% of 3.3 billion, or about 2 billion, are informal workers in Asia Pacific. Individuals informally employed in the formal sector or are in vulnerable employment in the informal sectors. So unlike workers in informal employment, informal workers have little no legal protection in employment security, income, social protection, and labor rights, including the rights to organize. Then why it's very important also to mention this, because around 80% of workers in formal sector are women. So during this crisis, lower wages workers, mostly women, have been severely affected. And then ILO in 2021 reports that women has tend to drop from the labor force, and then in average declined by 1.4%, while labor force participation rates among men declined only 0.8%. Yeah. So and then also there is a lot of evidence that we document from our FPAR and also our labor COVID-19 stories, COVID-19 storybooks, that it shows that how women lose their wages and then were sent home without any pay, and then where all of the suppliers in the special economic zone, industrial zones, free trade zones, export processing zones failed to provide and protect the occupational safety and health, and then also a lot of documentation showing that many of them have to buy themselves rapid antigen PCR tests, and then if they don't have the test, if they don't do the test, so the factory will refuse them. So that's the reality during the crisis. And then, then is you see that neoliberal capitalism market model sustains the systemic barriers by promoting deregulation, privatization, and labor market flexibilization, and then has resulted in the tradition of low wages for women. And beside which, overtime is also regular practice across low-paid jobs, and hazardous environment without sufficient protections is also take a toll on the women workers' health. So, but at the same time, women workers are afraid also losing their underpaid jobs, and because of that, they are really afraid. And then they want to avoid taking sick leave. They don't want to take more than 3 minutes toilet break, because if they do that, they would risk their future. So their fear of job loss makes women not only choose not to talk, but also not to complain, not to speak up about their struggles with their co-workers even. So organizing and joining the collective action threatens their job security because those activities have been criminalized. So working in solitude seems the best survival kit for women on the factory floor. So this situation illustrates us how precarity ends up trapping women in physical cycle, one that seems nearly inescapable. Women are struggling in silence while fulfilling global buyers' demand. But at the same time, the capitalists enjoy more and more profit from workers' suffering. And then also, as I already mentioned several times by our other sisters before, corporations are always backed up by governments using military forces to ensure women workers remain precarious and are unorganized by intensifying union busting, intimidation, and violence against unionists or workers' activists or labor rights defenders. However, for women workers, there is no option other than persistently strive for their human rights in the time of the crisis. So they keep resisting, despite the companies is exerting the union busting or the intimidation towards the mobilization of women, and then. And then as we already mentioned before, that all of these activities related to the union or organizing, mobilizing, or if they want to exercise their collective bargaining, were restricted in many factory areas where women work. In Bangladesh, at least 3,000 workers were dismissed when they exercised their freedom of associations and collective bargaining. And then I also heard from Jennifer when she mentioned about gender-based violence, right? So gender-based violence escalated during the crisis, and violence has been utilized to silence women workers, including women workers leaders, and also labor rights defenders. Then, many of our members presented the case where women workers leaders in the factory, and then also in the non-conventional workplace, and counter violence and intimidation when they demanded their suppliers or their management to retain their rights to provide maternity benefits for the workers. And then also because it's because during the crisis especially, women are deprived of their reproductive and maternal health needs and benefits. So pregnant women are discriminated against and against how to get job, then could hardly get a job. And then women workers are not allowed to take leaves when they have reproductive health issues. And yes, it's really fatal. And actually, if they have if they can exercise the rights to organize and rights to mobilize, they have a space to to demand their rights in linked with the maternity benefits and also reproductive health rights. But because of this restriction, it's not possible for them to exercise them. So yes, I've stopped here, and I will continue if you need more elaboration or more exploration. Thank you so much, Agatha.
Thank you so much, Andy, for that very comprehensive discussion on the women's economic issues in the Global South under neoliberal regimes, including their struggles in organizing and mobilizing. We now have Gertrude Kenyangi of Swagen and IBON Africa to share.
Yeah, thank you very, very much for this opportunity. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Well, the foregoing, the people who have spoken before me have almost exhausted the issues that we are facing here in my country and in sub-Saharan Africa in general. As you know, women face very many issues, even those that have already spoken, have been said, but I still have some still to share. Majority of Africa is male-dominated. The predominant economic activity is agriculture, and land is the main asset. A major factor of production in crop, livestock, fisheries, and forestry. However, its acquisition is mainly through inheritance, and inheritance is governed by the patriarchal system and ensures that land passes from father to son. This concentrates power in the hands of men. When they control the production, the means of production, they hold the power. The women are left without rights of access, rights of control, and rights of decision-making regarding utilization of the land or utilization of what is produced on it. It violates the right of women to make investments in profitable ventures and perpetually chains them to poverty. The second issue is workload. The immediate speaker alluded to workload in factories, but also at home, in the private sphere. A disproportionate portion of productive, reproductive, community, and care work is borne by women. Studies show that a woman spends 16 hours of the 24-hour day working. This denies women an opportunity to invest in self-improvement programs such as education and skills training and profitable ventures such as trade. But also, it's detrimental to their health. The third one, I would say, a threat from corporations, multinational corporations. Africa, especially sub-Saharan Africa, is virgin ground, including Uganda. The agriculture practiced is largely traditional, and now coupled with climate change and civil wars, incidentally, the civil wars are propagated by corporations, which see profit in arms proliferation. Now, when this situation, it's the situation of climate change, of civil wars, and of agricultural practice largely as traditional, precipitates a situation of food insecurity and food shortages. Corporations ride on these unfortunate situations to push hybrid seeds, to push pesticides, to push herbicides manufactured in their labs that render agriculture and food production unsustainable, that destroy the environment, kill off pollinators. Africans are hamstrung to depend on corporations for food once their seeds are destroyed, once their soil is destroyed, which corporations laugh all the way to the bank every season. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you are hearing me well.
Yes, we
I hope
hear
you are
you.
hearing.
Yes, we hear you, Gertrude.
Yes. So what are we doing? How are we responding to these challenges? We have both practical responses, which are immediate stopgap measures, and also long-term responses, which are strategic and policy level. The practical ones, which are immediate, we stage protests. For instance, to show our displeasure, we stage protests. For instance, women in Amuru, when faced with an attack of corporations, of Total, of oil companies that wanted to drill oil in Amuru, which was discovered recently, they staged a protest. They didn't want to be evicted from their land and their means of production destroyed. They staged a naked protest, women undressed, to show their displeasure. They had to go to such extremes. It sounds gross, I know, but sometimes you are left with no option. They staged naked protests. The second response is we organize, we mobilize communities to form groups to speak with one voice. And it's these groups that we target. These groups, maybe I shouldn't use the word target, we cooperate with to create awareness, to build capacity, to create knowledge management, to package our information so that we can go to policymakers with information that will convince them, although we don't have money as much as the corporates have, who buy them four-wheel drives, who buy them computers, who buy them all sorts of things, but we can make our case. And the third one is advocacy. We attempt to influence policies and practices at different levels to bring about lasting change. We advocate for gender-responsive policies. Women issues should be put on the agenda. Gender should be routine, should be an everyday thing. It shouldn't just come as a by the way. We advocate for agroecology and food sovereignty as models of agriculture, that are sustainable, that respect the rights of the people who are practicing the agriculture, that respect the culture of the people that are practicing the agriculture. We advocate for demand-driven and human rights-based research that's participatory, not research conducted in the US, research conducted in other countries, in their laboratories, and they come and dump on us seeds claiming that they produce better. We want a research that we have put, we have participated in, research that respects our views, research that addresses our concerns. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That brings me to the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Gertrude, for sharing about rural women's struggles in sub-Saharan Africa, including their struggle for food security and the threats of militarism. Now we have Joms Salvador from Gabriela. You have the floor, Joms.
Thank you, Agatha, and good day, everyone. It's a delight to be speaking before all of you today. I am Jom Salvador of Gabriela, Alliance of Filipino Women. I am also an Asian woman and a woman from the Global South, which I would dare say has been a strategic battleground in the struggles for power of imperialists and monopoly capitalists. And I would like to start by stating that our current global economic system and the ways by which we as peoples from our own regions, from our own countries, from our own communities, navigate this global economy and live and survive as human beings, as women, came about as a result, of course, of geopolitical forces. Who gets what, when, and as much a matter of political decision as they were by economic forces. And such, our current global economic system is a battleground for competing interests, and always who wins or loses in this battle is determined by who wins in the struggle for power and influence. And so rising militarism and fascism and economic capture, or in other terminologies, probably the economics of war, are all intricately connected. Fascism and militarism are the lifeblood of imperialism, and imperialism has always meant war and militarism. Let me first reiterate that the COVID-19 pandemic has laid bare pre-existing weaknesses in governance and social protection provision in Asia, and as much as globally. And alarmingly, this pandemic and the global economic downturn that we are all experiencing lays bare the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on the livelihoods of millions in informal employment who have become newly unemployed or underemployed. And I say there that these are mostly women. The pandemic has highlighted the weak foundations of the Asian labor systems and the market economy in general. Restrictions on the movement of people and the sudden stoppage of or severe downswing of economic activities are having a strong impact on informal workers, the sectors worst affected by the pandemic, such as, of course, accommodation and food service activities, tourism, wholesale and retail trade, transportation. These all have a particularly high proportion of informal and female labor. In the global south, and even in advanced capitalist countries, we are witnessing an increasing political and social upheaval as oppressed and exploited peoples race to secure their lives, livelihood, and liberty. And this is, of course, met with increased militarism, state violence, and fascism. Fascism as a system is the complete disregard and violation of democracy and people's rights. Today, fascism is used as a tool by monopoly capitalists and their state appendages, including client states in the global south, to further curtail the rights of the people. They do this by militarizing communities, instituting violence, and curtailing democratic freedoms through dictatorship and militarist rule in an attempt to stifle people's resistance and to protect the economic interests of the monopoly capitalists whose power has always been defended by their client governments. And so from all regions of the world, fascist rulers with support from imperialist powers are taking advantage of desperate situations brought about by neoliberalism on the poorest and the most marginalized. The imposition of tax reforms, austerity measures, and free trade agreements are driving the poorest people, both in underdeveloped and developed countries, to seek alternatives to the rotting capitalist system. Governments, desperate to keep themselves in power, are doing everything to quell people's uprisings by riding on and fueling fascist, racist, anti-immigrant, and anti-poor sentiments. Women human rights defenders are persecuted, vilified, and often become the subject of direct attacks, either by governments or right-wing forces. The political and social gains already achieved by women's movements in many parts of the globe are being eroded by the comprehensive and fascist methods of suppressing opposition carried out by imperialist powers and their representatives in various countries. Yet, of course, we are fully aware that today, women from various parts of the globe are similarly engaged in struggles to defend their rights, lives, and communities. Women of the world are in what may be one of the worst times in modern history, with the rise of rightist governments and authoritarian rulers who also often represent imperialist interests and personify misogyny. And with geopolitical tensions at an all-time high, war is an inevitable result of the current crisis. The competition among rival global powers generates more flashpoints, which directly afflict vulnerable communities, especially in the global south, whose economies have always been fodder to the cogs of imperialism. And imperialist countries like the US link, for example, the global oil price increase due to imperialist instigated war in Ukraine. Of course, we know what nonsense this is. These oil monopolies have used every conceivable excuse to justify oil price hikes when the real reasons are these companies insatiable drive for profit and to somehow keep them afloat amidst the current economic downturn. And as women strike back against repressive regimes like here in the Philippines, we rise to oppose the imperialist wars that has most recently struck its deadly hand on, for example, Ukraine. Imperialist wars for oil and other natural resources make pawns out of people who are not only the main victims, but are also forced to be involved in a war that only benefits the warmongers and the 1% of industrial nations who gain from war production and deployment. The people, particularly women, on the other hand, bear the costs of war and militarism, with, of course, as have already been noted and stressed by the speakers before me, come in the form of rising prices, of extreme conditions at work, and so on and so forth. And so we resist and persist in our resistance against the continuing manipulation of imperialists against working peoples, against intensifying exploitation using neoliberalism, and against staging interventionist wars where it chooses. So at this point, I'm gonna end my discussion and maybe just a last call to every one of us that as we strive to protect and defend women's rights and dignity, we must also squarely put our defenses against the rising tide of fascism, militarism, and further economic oppression against women and the peoples. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joms, for sharing about women's struggle against militarism and repression in the Global South. We can now proceed to our second question. What are women's key demands to states and other development actors that would address their needs amid multiple crises? Perhaps Andy, you would like to share your insights?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Andy.
Okay. Yes, I think the most important, the demand is women's human rights, and then also decent work and living wage, and then how we also all together challenging the oppressive structures through the mobilizing in various fronts and organizing more women and building cross-sectoral alliances with other society groups, with media, and also other supporting organizations. So the idea is to broadening the movement for the development justice and human rights. So the first step to do that is building the capacity of grassroots organizations and community by developing new women leaders, activists. So I think that's the urgent task of feminist movement. And then building knowledge and resources, then through documenting their experience, and then make sure that they produce their own narratives by themselves, and utilizing from a feminist perspective, and how this narrative as narrative is a basis of to advocate for policies to make sure the demands there, and then prodding authorities prodding the authorities for this advocacy space. And that has been shared also by other speakers, that feminist movement in Asia, Global South, has been successful in empowering women to demand all of what I mentioned before, including economic and political rights. But there is still a long way to go. Major roadblocks and policy gaps are still there at various levels, still remain. And then to address these policy gaps, the following concrete policy recommendation supposed to be advised in across countries. For example, when we're talking about women in employment, so make sure that the state should advance policies to protect job security and also standard employment, not minimum standard, but living standard employment. Yeah. Repeal the wage setting mechanism to promote living wage, not the minimum wage. And then also respect international standards, including international labor standards. So when we talk about women in employment, and then when we talk about women human rights, I think and impunity on human rights violation against labor rights and women human rights defenders, and then enact law for their protection, and then actively promote the rights. I think that's a very important. Also, when we talk about decent work or labor rights, it's also we have to promote actively also for informal workers, and then also ensure their decent living standards, and then yeah, and sexual and gender-based violence and harassment at the workplace. And then also the most important also is to protect the rights to freedom of association, freedom of assembly, and then freedom of expression. That's all. Thank you, Agatha.
Thank you so much, Andy. Gertrude, perhaps you would like to share your insights as well. You have the floor. Hello, Gertrude. Gertrude, can you hear us? Okay. We can proceed to the third question. Maybe Gertrude will join us in a bit. We can proceed to the third question for now. So can you share how women mobilize for rights and system change in your respective countries and sectors? You may provide concrete examples of recent actions. Chatu, would you like to weigh in on this?
Hi, yes. Thank you very much. It was interesting discussion and to hear all of your stories and to compare with the women's stories in our side. So yes, as I already shared, like women are in this situation, in this critical situation, women are facing hardest time in their life as well in Sri Lankan situation with this economic crisis. So as you are aware, like recently women and also the most of the Sri Lankan when this is a struggle, like urging the government kind of a political and system change. So we came out we were in that struggle, and as women they were in this political space, they were representing all the women in the ground, and they were urging and they were demanding a system and political change. So that is one of the experience that I recently had about how women engage and how women approach to this change and demand this change in a political structure. So apart from that, I think from our experiences now, there's a kind of a change in the resistance of women as well. So in the struggle in the histories, most of the time, like women's role in the resistance and struggle was identified as a kind of a supportive role for what men do, or otherwise their voices are most of the time were hidden and also oppressed by the structures that has been built up within that certain movement or such kind of struggles. But today women are more empowered, and the most important thing is how do they understand the resistance and also the struggle is the most important thing, because with our experiences we have seen women are more aware about what's going on, the current economic situation and also the political situation through participating to diverse programs, awareness raising program, and also mobilizing work. And they are demanding, and they are saying like our lands are exploited, and also our lands are taken away from from us. Therefore, we are not going to give our lands, because lands are our lives. Therefore, if like in our previous experiences, because in Sri Lanka, there are a lot of corporations are now quite eager to come to Sri Lanka and invest on the land and in agricultural purposes. A recent example is the sugarcane plantations. So in Himalaya, the one of area around like 18,000 of hectares are going to be like captured for planting the sugarcane. But these lands are belong to the farmers. Therefore, farmers are continuously resisting against this land grabbing. But in this struggle, the women are in the front, and they are using different strategies in the struggle to stop this land grabbing. As an example, like they are, you know, like in trees, like previously they involved with this like they got the rope. It means like what wear by monks. So they wear it to the trees. Then if you cut a tree, it means like you harm to a monk, therefore it's a sin. So these kind of strategies are used within the struggle to resist by the women. And the other hand, like so in the ground level, women are leading a lot of campaigns and also alternative ways to face this struggle. So as an example, like the women in Vikalpani are developing, and they have built up their own structures to support other women as well. So as an example, in Vikalpani, we have different small group which are formed by the rural women farmers, and they are collecting some kind of a savings, and they are practicing this seed bank system, and also like a small scale market system and seed sharing system, and also kind of a different and creative agroecological practices to face this situation and also to support each other. So these kind of initiatives has been initiated by the especially the women in the ground level, and also they have they have finding their own solutions to resist and also in an empowered structure. So at the same time, the women, especially in the ground level, I would like to focus the women in the ground level more. They are having this discussion, the reflective discussions, as a summity. We call it summity. So once a month they come and they get together in some of their friends' house, and they have begun to speak about this the political situation in the country as well, and also what kind of actions that they need to start at their ground level. So they are kind of like organizing small scale protests, especially today as well. I saw the fisher women, they are organized and they are having a media conferences, and they're sharing like what is their real life before this economic crisis. So if you don't give us the kerosene, and if we don't give us the priority for distribution of kerosenes, our children are going to die. So they shout out this experience and the experience of their real life. So this is the important thing of this resistance, that my understanding is like what kind of new strategies are used by the women, and also how those ground level works can contribute to transform or contribute to change the system. So these kind of experiences that I have been through for the last few years. And also the other thing I wanted to share, like with this economic crisis, how women are engaged in the handling market system, in the market system, it's mostly men, or otherwise like the patriarchal structures which govern the market. So as a result of that, women farmers who are in the ground level, who are the producers, small scale women farmers, they face different discrimination, and also they get the minimum profit. But so women in Sri Lanka have developed their own market system, and they are trying to get linked with the upper level of the supply chain. Then they can gain the profit without without a middleman. So this is the understanding now. Most of the ground level, most of the means we are trying to do. So like mobilize the women and also support them to take actions against these huge national level issues by themselves. So like the women, they are not going to stop. So they are continuously in this struggling, and all the women, the most beautiful thing is like all the women are contributing to with their own capacities, with their own spaces, and with their own, like inputs. They are in this struggle and they are continuously engaged in this. So this is what I wanted to share about like this, what's going on in Sri Lanka in terms of the resistance, and also like in terms of responding to these political and also national level economic crisis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chatu. We can now call on Sayang to share about the how women mobilize for rights and system change in West Papua. Sayang, you have the floor.
Baik, terima kasih. Jadi setelah kurang lebih 60 tahun pendudukan Indonesia di tanah Papua, perempuan mulai bangkit melawan di zaman reformasi yang terjadi di Indonesia tahun 99 2000, dan sampai dengan hari ini perempuan sudah sangat aktif terlibat untuk mempertahankan tanah adat. Perempuan juga sudah mulai masuk ke banyak sektor. Kalau tadinya itu setiap aktivitas yang dilakukan di tanah Papua itu pasti di perlawanan rakyat dalam bentuk apapun, menyampaikan pendapat di depan umum,
in any form,
di rumah, bahkan dalam
to gather in-house, publicly speak, and even in the prayer that was intervened by the military or the police of Indonesia,
ditangkap,
arrested as part of rebellion act,
untuk menghentikan gerakan perlawanan rakyat,
arrested to stop the people struggle against the land grabbing. The government harassed the women being raped, killed, harassment done in front of the family only to stop the struggle of the people to defend the indigenous land. During that time, the access of information from and to Papua about the indigenous land grabbing, the human rights violation is covered. So international public did not notice about this, about the violence, about the land grabbing, the human rights violation. Women cannot speak. The spaces are closed because the government will do harm. Psychology or physically to the women. We Papuan women faced on between two things, to defend the land or to defend our generation. So we then push to silence to make our generation exist. We are afraid. We are afraid that we will be the Aborigine in Australia that is already not exist right now. But with the internet, the media access, we choose now to raise, to inform the international public that there is a colonialization happening on Papua. There's land grabbing happening in Papua. There's a marginalization happening on Papua. There's a genocide happening on Papua by the corporation. The corporation exists on the name of development, insists to grab our indigenous land, and the indigenous community lost their land, and they cannot live without land. After the technology development, the women are aware. By talent, we will also be finished. For example, Mama Josepa Loma against the corporate. Until now, women are already in many sectors. They are fighting for mining, agriculture, palm oil, freeport, and also LNG. Palm oil is all over Papua, in Manokwari, Sorong, in cities in Papua. Natural resources, grab, and women already took part at the forefront. We are patrilineal here, so men, so we will follow the men because it's patrilineal. But now we took the forefront place, and every issues and the basic problems of Papua is the occupation done Indonesia to Papua. The PEPERA on 96 is a false. That's the source. While so it's about so Indonesian occupation and also the extraction of natural resources of, from our land is illegal. All the process is grab and illegal. That is why now the women of Papua stand at the forefront because to us, land is mother. Mother is the one who birth life, who give life. So without land, there's no life. So join us. Every woman, every indigenous women, wherever you are, stand for your right. Without land, there's no life. We have to stand on land. We cannot live on air. Save our mother, save land to keep the life exist. So we ask all of you, to all women, wherever you are, please support us. The solution for the Papua people is only one: Papua liberation, free from Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sayang. Perhaps we can now call on Joms. Would you like to share your insights as well?
Yes, thank you. First of all, I'd like to say that as there are multiple layers of oppression that a woman face, there are, of course, multiple ways of acting in resistance. And Filipino women are finding several ways to fight back. It may be through protest art and music, street mobilizations, or organizing in communities. Some are even building and or joining revolutionary movements in order to topple despotic and fascist regimes. So workers in factories, for example, are collectively learning about their rights. They are unionizing in order to demand higher wages, equal pay, and better working conditions. There are women workers in the service and health sectors who are also unionizing and collectively fighting for living wage, for safer workplaces, and maybe just dignity in the workplace. Peasants and indigenous women are taking over lands from landlords and fighting against corporate takeover of their communities. There are also women political prisoners who are staging different forms of protests inside their own jails, organizing fellow inmates as a form of demanding justice and asserting their rights. Young women are taking over, let's say, social media, combing through the web of disinformation and misinformation, discovering new ways of organizing, despite, for example, being locked down in their homes for the past years during the pandemic. And we're seeing a lot of new forms of organizing coming from the end of young women who are, of course, making do with whatever they have, but at the same time not or keeping the fire for change alive within them. There are women who were defying restrictions to their mobility in order to help each other. And through that collective action, prove that there is power in uniting with each other and acting collectively. There are rape and sexual harassment victims who are calling out their perpetrators and are highlighting how power relations play a big role in perpetuating violence against women, and how these power relations have to be dealt with in order to truly achieve justice for all victims of violence against women, and for violence against women to end. There are also, of course, social movements that despite state machinery such as laws and norms that curtail even further people's rights in democratic spaces, such as, of course, anti-terrorism laws and human security laws, social movements are resisting and persisting in struggle to defend rights, lives, and security. We could probably go on and on, but I would just like to say that women who have been historically socialized to suffer in silence and just accept our situation, when we take back our voice and make that strong by joining with other women to confront our situation and our oppressors, whether we do that consciously to effect long-term social transformation, that is already part of the system change that we all pining and hoping that we would be able to achieve in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joms. Before we proceed to the open forum, I would like to get back to Gertrude again. Gertrude, perhaps you would like to share your insights on the previous questions on women's key demands to states and other development actors that would address women's needs amid multiple crises. Are you here with us already, Gertrude? Okay. Perhaps she can provide more input later on. For now, we can proceed to our open forum to provide space for our audience to share their questions and insights on our very comprehensive input from our speakers for the day. Are there any questions from the participants? Or perhaps if not questions, then maybe additions to the discussion. If there are no questions and or insights for now from the audience, we can proceed to showing the pre-recorded message that Donna Denina has from the International Women's Alliance has sent us.
Hello, my name is Donna Denina, and I'm the Secretary General of the International Women's Alliance. I'm here in Tunisia attending the World Women's Conference together with the Secretariat, learning and sharing about the state of women in Africa, Asia, Europe, and in the Americas, in a time of growing fascism and militarism that is present more than ever. Unfortunately, I can't be with you all there today, but would like to share a few words about women and the struggle against militarism and fascism in the Global South. Women in the Global South today are suffering the most extreme forms of violence, exploitation, and oppression amidst a backdrop of severe economic crisis, wars of aggression, fascism, and militarism. The onset of the COVID-19 pandemic has put the entire world in the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression in the 1930s. The hardest hit to suffer from this crisis are those living in the Global South, with widespread unemployment, an insatiable medical crisis, and a slew of socio-political problems permeating throughout every corner of the globe. This paints a gloomy picture for the Global South, wherein many countries are yet to emerge from the pandemic and others are already feeling the after effects of prolonged socioeconomic disruption. Since the mid-20th century, the global economic system has worsened under neoliberalism, an economic system marked by increased privatization and deregulation. Neoliberalism's goal is to gain super profits for the ruling class in an attempt to avoid capitalism's eventual collapse. The obscene wealth of a few and severe poverty of the many has exacerbated immensely under neoliberalism. Income disparity is therefore intrinsically linked with austerity, where women are disproportionately pushed to the bottom rungs of the financial classes. They end up requiring much greater support through public services and therein become increasingly vulnerable to the ill effects of austerity. Austerity has had a significant and especially alarming effect on the social and financial status of girls and women in the Global South. One of the central tenets of austerity is that governments effectively forfeit Social Security and benefit schemes that target education, child, and old age support. By doing so, governments pass the responsibility of care for the dependents of society to women, who undertake about 75% of all unpaid work. Women workers who fight against their exploitative and unbearable working conditions are repressed by their own governments, often not being allowed to unionize, as many of these unions do not recognize the particular conditions women face in the workplace as workers' issues. Low wages, lack of affordable childcare or access to health care, sexual harassment, violence, abuse, illness, and even death. Even under such brutal working conditions, inflation and global health crisis, workers continue to stand up against the capitalist forces by demanding decent wages and improved working conditions. Even when they are met with oppressive measures for organizing, workers are united and demand change. Since 2020, we have seen a surge in worker strikes in the public sector and in healthcare, with attendance reaching into the thousands. Increased political and social unrest under the current crisis is met with increased militarism, violence, and fascism. Fascism as a system and as a tendency is the complete disregard and violation of democracy and people's rights. Today, fascism is used as a tool by the monopoly capitalists to further curtail the rights of the people, militarize communities, and impose a kind of dictatorial rule to quell any signs of resistance and to protect economic interests of the monopoly capitalists whose power reigns over those of the governments they control. With geopolitical tensions running at an all-time high, war is an inevitable effect of the crisis. The vicious competition among rival hegemons generates more flashpoints, which directly afflict vulnerable communities. For many years, it seemed impossible that war could break out in Europe. But today we are facing a situation with US imperialism continuing to expand the buildup of NATO forces in Eastern Europe. The threat of Russia, which has now invaded Ukraine, and the European Union threatening sanctions. This has been an open provocation to Russia, whose President Vladimir Putin is demanding the NATO's eastward expansion be scaled back. What does this mean for women and workers everywhere? This war and the sanctions placed on Russia will raise prices on top of what is already the fastest pace of inflation in 40 years. US President Biden and NATO continue to escalate, knowing that there will be economic consequences, which will be most acutely felt by the working class and rural communities who have already been hit hard by the pandemic crisis. As women fighting for justice, freedom, and peace, We do not side with either the US, the European Union, NATO, or Russia. All of them are pursuing imperialist goals and have made it clear through various threats of war, such as Afghanistan, Eastern Ukraine, Syria, and so on. The reality is that these wars lead to the intensification of the double oppression and decaying social situation of women and children. War is the continuation of imperialist politics. Imperialism means war. As Iwa, we must continue to resist these imperialist wars of aggression that cause so much destruction to the lives of many. Building a movement built on peace and justice to oppose these wars are key to calling for an end to these wars. Women must join in the ranks of the millions of workers suffering under the current crisis and continue to expose the rotten character of neoliberal policies. The imperialist agenda has had its eye on the Asia-Pacific region to expand to new markets, which can only mean one thing: more devastation to the people and the land, more repression and exploitation, and more vicious competition between imperialist powers. Whether it's the Ukraine-Russia war in Europe, and now with the current Taiwan-China conflict in Asia, US imperialism has had a hand in provoking these imperialist powers, heading in the dangerous path of inter-imperialist conflict and impending world war. Despite this, however, women have continued to resist and fight, whether it's facing the Zionist regime in Israel over its illegal occupation of Palestine, waging protest strikes among garment workers in Bangladesh, rejecting outright the election fraud who brought in the son and daughter of former fascist dictators to extend dictatorial rule in the Philippines. Women have been fighting and will continue to fight until a new and just society is won, not just for their own liberation as women, but for the liberation of all working and oppressed people around the world. It is only through persistent militant struggle of women in all forms, together with all oppressed people, as the true and only path to advance the rights of women. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Donna. We are grateful for Donna for taking the time to send us this message on how imperialist countries wage wars against the people. Again, we would like to ask the audience, perhaps they have questions or insights that they would like to raise before we proceed to the last part of our program. A comment from Gary Turner. An insight for me, austerity is equals government forfeiting social support and passing responsibility to women. This is a profound insight weaving much of today's discussion. Thank you, Gary, for your comment. Okay. If there are no other feedback from the audience, we will now proceed to the last part of our program. We call on Sarojeni Rengam, the Executive Director of Pesticide Action Network Asia Pacific and IBON International Board of Trustees Chair, to synthesize our discussion.
Thank you so much, Agatha, and thank you for all the, and the facilitator. Thanks for everything. First of all, I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone, and I'm happy to do this synthesis because I'm really inspired by the women here who are in the forefront of the struggle and the resistance. It's amazing. So as women, we have been struggling from the beginning, and we have been successful to have advanced our rights, including the rights to be recognized as farmers, as workers, as fighters for democracy and rights. We have fought and have been successful for equal pay, for equal work. Our struggles have brought success in terms more humane working hours, better wages, struggle to stop wars, protection from gender-based violence in the workplace, maternity leave, and other civil political rights, including sexual and productive health rights. And peasant and indigenous women have led national liberation movements and persevered in the land struggles. However, we are still a long way from real liberation and self-determination and rights as women. So we are in the last many decades now facing further marginalization and face massive poverty and exploitation due to neoliberal policies and where women are left out in decision-making and governance. We've heard from all the speakers about how land, territories, forests, water bodies are now grabbed by corporations in collusion with our governments, and we face contamination of our environment and our bodies with chemicals and waste. Women are also experiencing gender inequality in different ways. Peasant and rural women own less land and land of lesser quality than men. Women are paid low wages and many work under vulnerable conditions. We also heard about how we are facing a war and military occupation where all opportunities for development are destroyed. Overall, we heard that the world economy and politics are under the control of imperialist forces and fascism. As women, we heard we never give up. The testimonies and speak outs here shows that women continue the resistance and assert their rights. Our demands are: get out from our land and territories, democratize ownership and control over productive resources, and assert the full participation of people and their organizations in development processes and governance. Support women's rights to land. In many regions and countries, the people's movements have asserted their autonomy and rights over their lands and culture, such as West Papua. And we also heard from speakers about how we need to stop dependency on foreign capital and investment and to reverse the current neoliberal directions of IFIs and bilateral and multilateral trade and investment agreements. We call for a stop in terms of corporate monopoly and power, which continues to violate people's rights and sovereignty and hinder national development. These also include land grabbing, control of our seeds, pushing pesticides and fertilizers, mining, and even digital economy. Corporations and the states should be held accountable for rights violations against women, including peasant and indigenous women. We are continuing to strive for women's rights for agroecology, developing policies and programs that foster women's engagement in and ownership of agroecological food production that restores biodiversity, regenerates the agro ecosystems, and especially the soil, and provides resilience against climate change and other disaster risks. We also called for to ensure labor rights for women, rights to a safe working environment, and social protection. We call for stopping union busting and to uphold the rights of workers to organize themselves and have the right to strike. We also demanded socialized care work that would enable women's economic and political participation. The democratic participation and leadership of women and their organizations in economic planning, decision-making, and development processes at all levels. We call for more public investments in education, healthcare, social protection, and against gender-based violence and other public utilities. We also said that women continue to strive for human rights and resisting fascism, militarization, and imperialism. And finally, we call for the stopping of the human rights violations of women, including genocide in countries like West Papua, who are resisting, and women who are resisting these forces. Overall, we said that women are creating awareness, we are organizing and mobilizing, and we are in the forefront to resist patriarchy, corporate control, fascism, militarization, and imperialism. We, as empowered women, we said, are fighting for rights, ensuring people-powered democracy and our own solutions, our autonomy, land and territorial rights, food sovereignty, and agroecology. A women united will never be defeated. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Saro, for that very invigorating message, for distilling our discussion into clear calls for women's rights in social transformation. This concludes our program. Thank you to all our inspiring speakers. You can watch the recording of this webinar on facebook.com/IBON International. You can also download our white paper, Advancing Women's Rights and People-Powered Democracy, on our website, iboninternational.org. It is available in Spanish and French as well. Before we close our Zoom room, would you like to take a photo together? Okay, would everyone like to open their Zooms? Okay. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's raise our fists. After a militant and fruitful discussion. 1, 2, 3. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Everyone. Thank you to all our speakers.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.